You've tuned in to When Your Mind Becomes the Scene of the Crime podcast. I'm Dr. Linda F. Williams. I take survivors of abuse and trauma from pain to purpose so that you take back your power, tap into the truth of who you are, and live your best life now. Joyce Meyer already established that our mind is a battlefield, and that's because the Bible clearly says that our mind is God's natural-born enemy. It can't understand spiritual things and matters of our purpose, mission, and destiny. We have to connect with God through our spirits, which are inside of our souls. So if our spirits have to come through our souls, which is where all of these scars from the past exist, then there's going to be a challenge with respect to our spirit informing how we think. To some extent, we have to handle our own business in that regard. But in order to do that on this battlefield, we have to understand where the enemy is lurking and how the enemy has devised his battle strategy. Because the mind is the battlefield, we're going to use military terms to explain this process. We've talked about how we're off focus. Well, just like in military situations, there are what we call minefields, and we know that these minefields can be full of improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. They're designed to detonate without the soldier or the troops understanding that they're stepping on it. So they don't know they're in trouble until they step on these minefields, and it causes major physical damage and a lot of casualties. Well, on this minefield, in this battlefield, we have what we call mind fields. And these minefields lurk in the enemy territory where he's got different things he's orchestrated. So he's the consummate playwright, in other words. He's doing everything he can to get you to forget or not to know that you got the power to rewrite your story, to rewrite your life, that you don't have to go by what he's scripting for you. So these minefields are full of what we call irrational emotional discharges. Okay? These irrational emotional discharges aren't necessarily always a blow up, a crying jag. An irrational emotional discharge is really us acting out of the scripts that we've learned over time. It might be some negativity we learned, or some false thinking we learned growing up from our parents. It could be the things we've said inside. Every time you take a blow to your soul and you take that hurt and that pain internally, even without you knowing it, you've already decided that you're not going to let that happen again. And in order not to let that happen again, then you go all the way to the wrong end of the scale and say, well, I'm not this and I'm never that, and I'm never going to let anybody treat me like that. And what those things are, when they come up in your life, those are considered irrational emotional discharges. It occurs without your knowing it. So what the consummate playwright does as the enemy, he's writing, he's orchestrating the situation here, circumstance there, because he knows what's going to trigger you to act out of that negative script. As long as he can keep you acting out of that negative script, he knows you're not going to be able to develop the vision to see that, whoops, I don't have to do this. I can rewrite my story. So these irrational emotional discharges are always tied to something we went through in our past. And what they do is they cause us to react in the here and now based on how we drew these scripts in our past, based on responding to something in the past. And I can tell you how this played out in my life. There was a rape that I had endured. It took me 30 years to really tell the whole full story of it. This is the primary example of telling half the story. Now, in my second marriage, I did indicate to my husband that I had been raped. But I never told him the full story about that because I felt ashamed of having let that guy in the room. I felt like that I had made my bed, I needed to lie in it. That's example one of a script that I learned as a child. I learned that if you make a decision That's your bad. You deserve the consequences. And that's how I thought about that rape. Well, some of you have heard the story of how I was called to write the book, Whose Apple Is It Anyway? And how that book took 7 years of my life to write, 7 years and 6 days to be exact. My sister had told me, Linda, you're going to write a book, but that book will only progress as you heal. And sure enough, there were times when I just could not write. I would try to force it. I would try to make it happen. I knew that it was just no anointing on it. Each time I experienced writer's block like that, without fail, there was some other level of healing I had to go through, and this is how it played out. Had a boyfriend, we had this game, and what would happen is I would tell him something that happened to me in my, past, and it would be weird stuff that would happen, and then we would talk about it seriously, and then we'd laugh about it, and so it got to the point where he would think, what's it going to be next? Well, one day we were getting out of the car, and I told him, I said, I was raped, yada, yada. I told him the whole story. I let the guy in my room, he had sodomized me, left me bleeding, and he asked me a simple question. Did you go to the doctor? It stopped me in my tracks. I had never in 30 years thought about going to the doctor. So it kind of knocked me off my loop because it was like, that's not the script I'm acting out of. And I stopped right there where I stood, and then I jumped back into my script. Well, why should I tell the doctor? I wasn't going to tell the doctor anything. I didn't want him to know I'd done something that stupid. And that man never said anything to me there. But within a few weeks, he had the opportunity to tell me this. Linda, I wanted to tell you that was messed up. At what point does that man own what he did to you? At what point is it his bad in that? You're saying it's all your fault. You made your bed to lie in it. You hadn't even thought about going to get some health care for yourself. He said, you know what, Linda, your responsibility in that began at the point where you invited him over and let him in that door. Everything he did to you from there on in is stuff he's planting in his own harvest, and he has to own that wrong he did to you. It was the first time I learned that I had to separate myself from what happened to me, recognize healthfully where I made decisions that led me into that, and then be able to let go enough to recognize that, look, I didn't ask that guy to rape me. I didn't know he was a rapist when I let him in the room. And then I could walk through writing some more on the book. But as I wrote more on the book, I recognized how I had become the wrong that was done to me. I had become that wrong. I thought I deserved that rape. I thought I set myself up for that. I thought I needed to suck it up and just move on. Don't you know I was moving on, but I was way off my path of purpose. 30 years, you guys, that I didn't talk about that rape fully. Now, let me tell you how the IEDs occurred. Aside from the fact that I walked around with that self-loathing for years, let me tell you, this is going to seem extreme, but this is just truth, y'all. I don't know what else to tell you. Out of that pain, out of me identifying with that pain, internalizing that pain, saying I deserved that pain, too ashamed to tell people that I'd made a dumb mistake, I wound up marrying a rapist and didn't know it. That's how extreme. That seems extreme. That's just truth, you guys. But this is how it plays out in our lives. I chose to be in a 16-year marriage with a man that not only molested my child, okay, but he was out there raping other women. He'll never see the light of day again because now he's in prison. But this is how this plays out in our life. Now, during that marriage, he had to come to me for some reason. He said, Linda, when that guy raped you, did you let him in the room? Now, I should have known something was wrong. Here's a in-your-face IED. I snapped him up. I said, no. And I mean, I must have had venom in my face and in my voice where he knew, don't touch that anymore. Now, I should have known many years before. Now, I would say that was a good 6-7 years before I admitted this rape to the guy that helped me realize it wasn't my fault. But I should have known. Now, that was an irrational emotional discharge. My husband touched on something about which I felt shame, that I felt I deserved, and I didn't want to talk about it. He knew not to touch that subject again, but guess what? I wasn't going to make it and move into my destiny until and unless I told that story exactly how it went down. And then I could free myself from it because I recognized where I was wrong, where I made a wrong decision, but by virtue of making that wrong decision didn't render me deserving to be raped until I was bleeding. Now, internalizing that, what did I do? I wound up marrying a guy that was a rapist. Thankfully, during the last 7 years of that marriage, he never touched me sexually. Okay. But at the same time, it was a year or so after that he got caught by the police doing this thing with raping these prostitutes. I don't understand what was going on. I really was tortured that he wouldn't deal with me sexually, okay, during the marriage. But as I look back, I'm grateful to God that he did. I don't know what dude was picking up out there. God is good. Even in the middle of that, he protected me from that. Now, I wanted to be completely transparent with you guys about this because I want you to see that, look, number one, I'm not drawing on all the degrees I got hanging on the doggone wall. That's paper. That represents a milestone in my academic career. I didn't write Whose Apple Is It Anyway based on those degrees on the wall. Because the truth be told, as I was acquiring those degrees on the wall, I was learning the psychology of the things I'm telling you here. But I didn't identify with it. I didn't know. Scripts, I didn't want to hear about a dadgum, I forget what they call it, schema. You know, I read the book. I refused to use the term in any of my papers because I felt like you all are just trying to overcomplicate something that's got to be simpler than that. Not recognizing that every decision I made and everything I went through in my life, my here and now life back then, was completely related to the dynamics I was learning. We are clueless. Your stories matter. Why do they matter? They matter because they're tripping you out. Now let's talk about IEDs. So let's say that you go off in an IED. Somebody says 𝗪𝗪𝗶𝗍𝗪 to you, okay? Well, all day long you swearing up and down they said 𝗪𝗪𝗶𝗪𝗍𝗪𝗪. Now everybody around you heard 𝗪𝗪𝗶𝗪𝗪, but you often running down some rabbit trail based on something in your past. You're all upset. You're not dealing with reality in that condition. We're not dealing with reality in that condition. When we have these stories we will not tell, we are living by those internal scripts, whether we know it or not, and they are leading us down this path of stolen vision because they're leading us down a path where we do not see clearly. You cannot make a decent decision in your life, your career, your relationships if you're not dealing from a standard of truth, which is not what we're dealing from when we've got these hidden things inside of us. So that being said, now that we know that what the enemy will do, I studied this thing. I wanted to look up battle terms, and we know what reconnaissance is. Reconnaissance is what Moses had. The spies go into the promised land to see what was there, who was there, and come back and tell them what they saw. That was a covert reconnaissance mission. But in military terms, they have something called reconnaissance by fire. Okay? Reconnaissance by fire. Now, that means, okay, I'm not going to put my hiney in danger and go behind enemy lines, try to figure out where you're cowering or where you're hiding and where you're planning an attack on us. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to fire off some rounds and let you tell on yourself. We'll know where you are when we get through throwing a few grenades here and there and pulling out that machine gun on your hiney. Okay? And then you tell on yourself. That's exactly the strategy that the enemy uses with us, where we've got these hidden agendas, these hidden scripts. These things are driving every wrong decision that we're making. It's the reason we get caught up in multiple relationships that are unaffirming. It's the reason why we're sitting up praying for that man, praying for that woman that God has for us. And we might have decided we're willing to wait. We might be deciding we're going to wait for God. But all of the wishing, waiting, and praying is not getting us there because of this very dynamic. IEDs. Let me tell you why else this happens. Another reason this happens is because We already know that if you're on your path of purpose, the man or woman God has for you is there. Every resource you need to accomplish your mission in the master plan is there. Everybody that you're a divine connection for and everybody who's a divine connection for you is along that path. Guess what? If you going down a rabbit tail and you're going down the path of stolen vision, you're not going to get any of that. And all of the praying, wishing, and waiting you do is not going to make a difference because God has already positioned that along your path of purpose. He is not flipping that script just to help you to get what you're praying for. What he wants us to do is deal with the internal dynamics that are keeping us from being on our purposeful path and realizing and having the vision that he has given us as our spiritual birthright. So if you are off on a rabbit trail and say you just by some stroke of blessing, you run across somebody who's supposed to be a divine connection for you. But because of these things you're not talking about and these false scripts that's driving and the decision you're making, then you might really offend that person or push them off or not even recognize them for the blessing they are. And now what have you got? You've already X'd out a divine connection. What's worse? Let's talk to you all who have ministries. What is worse, okay, is that if you have a ministry, trust me, if you've been through some junk, God won't that be part of your ministry. That means that you've been through some junk. I want to use you as a divine connection to facilitate the healing of others. If you're all locked up inside like I was about that rape, then you're not going to be able to relate to somebody that's in the middle of that pain because you got the defenses up and you don't want to deal with your own. You know that if you relate to them there, then that's going to bring up stuff you don't want to deal with on some subconscious level. And now there's somebody standing there that God put you in their life by divine direction to help them out. You can't even see it. And this is one of the reasons why ministries go by the wayside. This is one of the reasons why we get in our ministries and then we get to a point where we feel like we're not growing. We feel like that something's missing. We're praying and asking God what it is, but are we prepped? Do we have the courage it takes to face the things he's trying to show us in ourselves? Because as long as we're in the condition where we're living out of fake, false scripts and the lies of our past, the lies that our past are telling us, we're not going to hear God. We're not going to hear him. In fact, if God put somebody in your life to show you that, you will be so highly offended that it'll be all their fault, not yours. Trust you me, been there, done that. So we want to be aware of the minefields. We want to be aware of reconnaissance by fire. We want to be aware of how our own irrational emotional discharges are really holding us back and clouding our vision. And by doing so, we will already be aware of the enemy battle plan. This is the deal. On anybody's battlefield, if your enemy has a higher vantage point than you do, and they can see you coming, you're already in a one-down position and likely to lose that battle. And I want to remind you that with the children of Israel, they lost some, they won some, and when they lost it, it was all at the hands of their own stinking thinking. So the war was inevitable. The losses were unnecessary. And so it is in our lives. Thank you for joining us today for When Your Mind Becomes the Scene of the Crime podcast. To contact Dr. Linda, just go to 𝗤𝗨𝗔𝗟𝗘.org. That's 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙